What's up, everyone? I'm Nathan Graham Davis, and I'm going to re-break in as a Hollywood screenwriter. So it is week 19, and in the interest of being transparent, since that's what I've been trying to do with this whole series, I am a good 10 to 15 pages behind on my rewrite. It's the first time I've been behind on anything really in this whole series. You know, it's kind of frustrating, but also it's okay. The reason why is largely because we just had a fucking insurrection at our Capitol a couple weeks ago, and you know what? Honestly, I've been doom scrolling. It's been hard to keep my eyes off the news. It's been very distracting. But the good news is that today's Inauguration Day, and President Biden and Vice President Harris were just sworn in a few hours ago. You know, our country's definitely got a long road to recovery, but I think we're on the right road. So I'm encouraged by that, and that's great. The other thing that's been distracting me, so CACTUS Jack, my first movie, my first feature film that I've been credited in, period, just dropped an hour and a half ago. I'm a producer on this one. It is directed and written by the Thornton brothers, who did an incredible job, and it is starring R. Michael Gull, who absolutely killed his performance as a vile, hateful white supremacist. We started working on this 5 years ago, before Trump was even elected. We had no idea how much shit like this was going to blow up. Jay Thornton said it really well, where, you know, when we started on it, it was kind of like this was a heart murmur in the country, and now it is a full-on fucking cardiac arrest. But we've stayed the course. We felt like this was a subject that needed to get this treatment in film. It is, we pulled zero punches. I highly encourage you to watch it, but it's going to be triggering for some people, and I just want to put it out there. The first 48 hours of this premiere, we decided to make not-for-profit. That's going to go until 5 p.m. Eastern on Friday. So if you see this episode before that and you want to check it out, please check it out. And even if you don't make the premiere, I hope you'll check it out anyway. We're very, very proud of it. You'll probably see some big reviews come out on Friday as well. No idea what those are going to be like. We're kind of nervous, but you know, it's exciting to have it finally coming out. And just like with it being Inauguration Day, now that this is out, I think it'll free up some mental capacity and make it a little bit easier for me to get back to writing again. So anyway, that's where I'm at right now. Now it's time to dig back into this rewrite, keep pushing forward. I really do want to have this done by, you know, early spring at least, so that I can make a real push to break back in with it. So if you haven't subscribed to the series already, please do that, because when I finish the script, my goal is to do a live streamed reading of the finished, polished script, and I can't do that unless I got 1,000 subscribers. So I'm like halfway there right now, and you clicking that little red button and subscribing makes a big difference. So thank you so much for that. This week I'm talking to James Simpson. We connected about re-breaking in, because as he shared, even though he had a movie made, he wrote the movie Armored, and it did pretty well. He's had to re-break in since then. And that is a experience that many writers have, no matter how successful they are. So we had a really cool conversation all around that, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, James.
Hey, how are you doing, Nate? There we are. All right.
Good.
Yep, we're good.
Good.
How you doing?
Nice backdrop there. That looks good.
Yeah,
Solid.
thanks. So where are you at? You're in New England, Massachusetts?
Yeah. Yep. I'm on the western side of Massachusetts, which it's a small enough state so people don't think of it that way, but it's very, very different than Boston, which is what everybody thinks of when they think of Massachusetts. So
right.
And are you Vancouver? Is that right?
Yeah, Vancouver,
Okay.
Canada. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've been there for a long time, right? Is that where you're from?
25 years. I'm originally from Ontario.
What made you move out that way?
Film school.
Oh, really? Okay. So it's been that from the very start, huh?
Exactly. Yeah. I got married at 22. We packed up everything we owned into a little Jeep, drove across the country, and went to film school out here.
Awesome. So,
Yeah.
so were you always pursuing screenwriting from the start, or?
Originally I wanted to be the next James Cameron.
Okay.
I
Nice.
wanted to write, direct, produce, create my own mini studio, all that. And film school taught me that I really, really love writing. And so I did the usual thing everybody does after film school. I directed a bunch of short films and a ton of music videos for local bands that were trying to make their mark as well. But at the end of the day, I just really liked writing and felt happiest at writing. So that's what I've been focusing on.
Awesome. How long was it before you kind of had your first break in screenwriting?
Well, depends on what you define by break. See, this industry is not
Sure.
the sort of thing where you have huge monumental moments. They're actually defined by all these little incremental things. Within a year of leaving film school, I was a quarter finalist on the Nicholl Fellowship.
Okay, yeah.
Within a year of that, I had my first manager.
Wow,
And I've
okay, so
had,
that was pretty fast after quarterfiling.
yeah, and it was because of the quarterfinaling in the Nicholl Fellowships that I got my first manager.
Huh.
And I've had multiple managers since then. A few left the business. A few went on to just sort of, I don't know what, they just disappeared. They sort of evaporated. That's the thing when you're starting out, right? You end up with these guys who are starting out just like you. They're starting out as managers. They're young, they're hungry, and they can't always sustain a career. So some of them move on to other things. Some move into production. Some go back to, waitressing and baristaing,
So is that what happened with some of your previous reps? Is they actually moved on?
Yeah.
Did something different?
I had some reps who just left the business entirely. I had some reps that went into other areas of the business. I was kind of on a string of everyone that repped me either no longer wanted to be a rep or something bad happened to them.
Wow.
And then things kind of, got serious in, I want to say, 2004, 2005. Then 2006 was a really good year because I had Armored and it became a finalist in the Nicholl Fellowships.
That's what I thought. Like I was trying to remember. So I had told you that Armored was actually the first hot spec script that I read.
Right.
I had been a writer for, I don't know, a year or two at that point. Probably written just maybe one script. Maybe I was on my second. I'm not sure. But a friend of mine sent me Armored, and I had never read like a spec script that had been making the rounds in town and that hadn't been produced yet. So it was super cool, and I was blown away to see what a script could look like. And so in some weird way, I'm sure that was influential on my writing now, as weird as that probably sounds, but it was the first one, so it's kind of funny.
Well, so you're trying to blame me for what's going on with your career? Is that what
absolutely. It's all your fault.
I take no responsibility. Yeah, the Nicholl Fellowship was a great, it kind of really juiced the script going out. There was a lot of buzz about it. And that was a really fun time. That 2005, 2006 time was great.
When did it get produced? I'm trying to remember because I know I read it before it was produced.
Yeah,
and that was exciting for me too. I was all pumped to have read a script before it came out, and then the movie came out, and I was like, I read that. So I remember like those feelings back then were just, I don't know. It was all like when like you're really bright eyed about everything, and
right.
It was fun.
Yeah, we sold it in October of 2006. Things moved really quickly when they knew from the get-go they were talking about they were going to greenlight this and move very quickly on it, and they did. We got into production production actually wrapped in 2008.
Yeah, that's insanely fast.
So from purchase to finished film was 2 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and then it came out in 2009.
So that was a catalyst for a lot more that came after it then, or?
Right. And, mutual friends, at the time, I thought I was totally hooped by this guy who had this script that came out that was that was about an armored car robbery, and it was Johnny Sullivan.
That's funny, dude. I didn't know he did one of those.
Yeah, he had one called Rapid,
I didn't even know that, but that
and
doesn't surprise me. That's
it
totally his
sold like
wheelhouse.
a month before we took Armored out. And my team, when that script
Oh my
sailed, they all
God.
said, "Oh shit, we're fucked." But
Oh man.
and the amazing thing is, Sony is the company that bought Rapid, and Sony's the company that bought Armored.
That's surprising.
And
Wow.
Rapid is also an armored car heist, like Armored is.
Huh. Holy shit, man. That's hilarious.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
so have you and Johnny like connected over that after since then or
We have,
yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
awesome, man.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean it's funny like how much that type of thing can actually happen. So Aftermath was the script that broke me in, and that's like a Die Hard on a Bridge type thing. And I was on my third draft of that when a Die Hard on a Bridge script sold. I remember it was like early February of that year, and I was just completely crushed because I knew things were finally clicking. Like I could feel that this was a really good script, you know. And thankfully, I had a couple friends who had already broken in at that point. They were like, "No, you just this is a good one. You got to believe in it. Just go for it anyway. Stick with it." And sure enough, I got repped off that, and then we optioned it. Even though something like that had sold the same year, so
Right.
it is weird how much parallel development there is, but also how sometimes it doesn't actually get in the way.
Well, and we also found out as we were sort of testing the waters with Armored that every major studio had an armored truck robbery script in development already. In fact, Rapid was not the first armored script that Sony had purchased. They had several of them in development. So I've come to find out, that was my first time discovering the way the business works. And you find out, like, for example, you've got Die Hard on a Bridge. Chances are Paramount had one, and Universal
Yeah.
had one, and Warner's had
Joss
one.
Whedon wrote one I found out later in like the 90s called Suspension, which was actually
Right?
really good, So,
Yeah, and they probably all had multiple versions of a Die Hard on a Bridge script. So kind of,
it's crazy.
once we go through it, once you've gone through it, and once I went through it, this idea that you've come up with an idea, and if anybody else has it, they had to have stolen it. Well,
Right.
Chances are there's already 10 versions of that idea that's already been purchased and in development.
So you did Armored, and did you have new reps at that point with that script after finaling in the Nicholl, or had you already been with them?
I actually got my manager while it was in the Nicholl and it was moving its way up and becoming a finalist. And after Armored sold, I kind of did like the tour around town, meeting with a whole bunch of different
Yeah,
reps,
sure.
and eventually settled on my agent, who I still have today as well.
Wow, that's awesome that you've been with them for that long. That's super cool.
Yeah, I signed with originally my manager, Dan Farah, introduced me to a whole bunch of agents, and I settled on Adam Levine, who at
Okay.
that
Yeah,
time was working at Endeavor, which was a plucky little company,
sure.
and stayed with him through the merger with WME, and stayed with him when he left and started Verve. So I've been
Dude,
with
that's
him
awesome.
for a very long time. Yeah.
Very, very cool. So, like, did you ever have managers that or reps that weren't a good fit for you?
Absolutely. In the early days, there were a lot of managers who you could tell were just looking for ammunition to fire out into town and see what would stick, what would land. They weren't really interested in developing a career. They weren't interested
Mhm.
in introducing me to the town, going out for assignments, any of that sort of stuff. They weren't interested in that sort of aspect of management. They were just really producers in sheep's clothing who were looking for product that they could latch on to and fire off into town. And if one or two people didn't respond to it immediately, they would drop it and just move on to the next.
So, like, I think that's a really good thing to talk about that I haven't discussed on here with anybody yet, and also I'm kind of thinking through myself. So I've only been repped one time by one manager,
Okay.
and he actually has helped a number of writers be really successful, but it just wasn't the right fit. I think he wanted to take me in a very different branding direction than seemed right, and so we were just constantly at odds about what I should be writing and what I should be going after, and it just it caused a lot of wheel spinning, basically, and not a lot of actual productivity. So did you develop questions that you were asking potential reps that you knew you needed to get the right answers to as you were interviewing them, or?
More or less, I came to realize that I had to be very clear about what I wanted. So I had to tell them what my vision for my career was and make sure they understood what I expected from them, and say, if you're on board with what I want to do, great, we can work together. But if you're not, then we shouldn't even attempt this marriage, this union. So I think, as a writer, you really got to be very clear about what it is you're expecting. And I was pretty clear that I didn't want to be developing stuff. I don't like to pre-develop stuff. A lot of reps will try and do that with you, where they think they know what the market is, and they're going to try and develop your material to hit that very narrow target they have in mind. And that's really kind of a fiction that they sell themselves. The reality is all the development's going to happen after they buy it, when they bring in a new director or other creative components. They're going to develop it and shape it to their vision. So there's really no point in developing the hell out of a product or a script before taking it out. I mean, there's minor stuff. If something jumps out and you say, oh, this is really bad, or this is really wrong, or you dropped this whole subplot, where did it go? That sort of thing. If there's obvious glaring mechanical issues with the script, it's good to have feedback and say this could be fixed. But in terms of developing it and fine-tuning it and shaping it to being something very specific, I think a lot of reps will try to do that. And if they do, then I say run away. You've got the wrong rep, because they're actually trying to produce it.
So for especially for newer writers who might be in this place for the first time ever, what are some warning signs of that type of manager that you were just talking about, who really just wants that ammunition to fire at the town?
One of the warning signs is that they will try and develop it. They will say, I'm looking for XYZ. I'm looking for a low budget contained horror movie. Do you have that? And if you don't, then they kind of lose interest right away. Then they're looking for something. They were in a meeting somewhere, or they were in a coffee shop, and the person beside them was talking about how at their job they're looking for whatever. However they get this information, they're making a very specific strategic attempt at one specific buyer for one specific product. They're not looking for a client who's an idea machine. They're not looking for a script that has universal appeal, or that's going to represent you as a writer to other people who have assignments. So you can say, look, this guy's written something really fantastic. You have to read this. I think a good agent or a good manager is a good cheerleader. And they're a good Sherpa. They're going to help you get up the mountain, but you're the one who's got to climb it. But they're going to at least point you to the best pathways to get there, and they're going to cheer you on as you go. That's all. I don't, a good manager or agent doesn't censor you. When, for example, I tend to write what I'm known best for. If I had a brand, what I'm best for is some sort of contained thriller, a version of a contained thriller of some kind. That's what I broke in with Armored. That's what I'm doing with Intruders. A lot of other scripts that have gotten traction for me are that sort of contained, middle to low budget thriller type of script. I don't want to be defined by that. I've written other scripts that are outside those genres, and my managers and agents, their job, which they do well, is not to say this isn't on your brand. We don't want you to write this. Their job is to say, well, this is really interesting. It's going to change the conversations about you, and we're going to get behind it and do the best we can with it. That's what I think as a writer, that's the most you can hope for, is an agent who's willing to go out with you and die on that hill with you. There's nothing more heartbreaking than to pour your heart and soul into something, and your manager, your partner, your warrior that's going to be with you in battle, turn around and say, I don't have your back. I'm not going to take this out with you. Then, it's hard because they're not that they're the gatekeepers, but they know the way to the gatekeepers. They are the point of access to the gatekeepers.
Mm-hmm.
And when they say, we're not going to take this out, it's really daunting, especially for a young writer who doesn't have a lot of connections in town. Writers tend to know other writers. So
so true. Like, I think I've talked to a lot of people who kind of contacted me through this now, who seem to think I'm super well connected because I know all these writers, but like, I'm not. Like, I know writers. I probably know less than 10 producers, So
exactly. Like when Armored sold, my first script sold, suddenly I was inundated with people asking me to read their scripts. And I'm like, I'm a writer. I can read your script and give you notes on your theme, but I can't do anything with it because I'm a writer. I'm not a director. And I maybe know at that time 2 or 3 guys that I could possibly show it to. But if I had those kind of connections, I'd be taking my stuff to them.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
It is funny how that works. I mean, I do wish I had kept in touch with some people that I had met kind of on that, whole water bottle general meeting tour. Because I really haven't kept in touch with those people over the years now. And now that I'm trying to get back in, my connections on that side of things are really, really limited. So it's really like starting from scratch again in a lot of ways.
Right. And that's so hard to do because there's so many people to keep track of and keep connections with, and they're changing companies constantly.
Yeah.
And the email they gave you last week might not be working anymore this week because
I know I tried to email a couple of them and it just like bounced back and okay.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So yeah, it happens. It's not easy. So as a writer, you're really dependent on your reps. And if they say we're not taking it out, that's a heartbreaker. That's a really heartbreaker. And it's a good sign that you should probably be looking for somebody else.
That's another thing that's challenging too, is like that transition, right? Like I did attempt that, I let go of my manager first. And when I say let go, I mean, it was my decision, but just to be fair to him, I think he was comfortable with that at that point too. I think he was, he mutually agreed that it wasn't a good fit.
Right.
And so at that point, I had another spec and I tried going out and finding representation with that and failed. And then, just got frustrated and went and did a graphic novel. But how have you managed to make that transition successfully in the past?
Not very gracefully. No. Like you, in the time when I was bouncing from rep to rep, there's a lot of times where you're wandering in the desert blindfolded, kind of looking for an oasis, but you never know. You never know what you're finding. You hope something's going to spark. Occasionally you find a rep, but I've never been in a position where I'm with one rep and I can easily leap to the next rep and within days have another rep. That's never been my case.
Okay, so it doesn't just happen like that. So
no, God, no. So you really got to, you've got to have a plan. Like if you got a rep that you're not happy with, rather than have this conversation about fire them, first put out the feelers and find out who else might be interested in repping you. And if every rep you reach out to is a hard pass, then that tells you something about where your career's at and should inform your decisions about what you're going to do with your rep.
Yeah, that's interesting. Although I do remember I had a friend who did that, and he had a pretty strong rep, but he was looking elsewhere because it just wasn't a good fit. And I remember he reached out to like one manager, and that manager like shot back at him and was like, "We don't poach from each other," you know. And I think that there is some of that, right? Like people don't want to poach each other's clients. There's a little bit of camaraderie there. Certainly, a lot of managers know each other. I mean, it's not that big of a business, you know.
Right. Absolutely.
So, you know, I wonder about navigating that as well.
Look, it's not poaching if you go to them. If they come to you, then that's poaching. But if you go to them and say, I'm not happy with whoever I'm with, would you be interested in taking me on as a client? It's not poaching. And if they say, we don't want to poach you, say, but if I wasn't with that manager or that agent, would you be interested? And if their answer is no, then you know. But if their answer is maybe, then you know something else.
Fair. Yeah, that's a good point. So we were talking about just kind of messaging back and forth before this, and you said that you thought just kind of the idea of re-entry and re-breaking in was interesting because that's something that you've had to experience yourself. Could you expand on that some?
Yeah, I think this is something, you know, in film school, they don't tell you this. And when you're starting out, they don't tell you this. The reality is, you think once I'm in, like pledging a fraternity. Once I'm in for life. And that's not the way it works in this business at all. In fact, after Armored sold, you have what you call heat, where people are aware of the sale. They want to have conversations with you because you're the guy who was able to sell something. So they want to attach themselves to you, hoping that you can work that magic trick again and sell something else.
Right.
After that heat starts to dissipate a little bit, less people want to attach to you because there's less motivation to be attached to you. And you get fewer and fewer meetings for assignments, you get fewer and fewer generals, etc. And they eventually dwindle away unless you are lucky enough to get some traction and make something happen, which most people aren't, because the way the business is, the way it radically shifted after I sold Armored, the idea of doing assignments pretty much disappeared. The assignments became fewer and farther between, which meant a lot of guys who were of a much higher caliber than I was, not in terms of the way the industry looked at them. They had more credibility. They had a longer list of accomplishments. They were going after the same assignments I was because of those dwindling assignments. And so the middle class writer and the lower class writer got squeezed out by all the upper class writers. And so you find yourself in a position where you're basically at square one again. You've got to break in again. You've got to redefine yourself all over again. So I've had to do that with multiple projects where you try and break in and redefine yourself. Like, for example, Intruders. Recently sold Intruders. It's at Paramount. Nobody bought it because they were hungry for the next script from that guy who wrote Armored many years ago. You know,
so that's important to emphasize that, like, even though you had a produced movie, it did well. Like, it's long enough ago that it doesn't have any real bearing on what you're putting out there now. And that sounds crazy if you haven't been in this business. Like, it sounds like you should absolutely be able to, you know, build off of that no matter what, right?
You would think that, but unfortunately in this business, that's not the way it works. I would say maybe there's comfortably a 1-year window after your movie comes out where you can still eat off of it. You can still you can eat off of it. People will take you out to lunch, take you out to dinner. They'll pick up the check because they want to talk to you about your next thing. After that 1 year, it's a little iffy. And after 2 years, you're definitely cold. No one's inviting you. No one's inviting you out for lunch just to talk to you because your movie got made. You know, you're pretty much off everybody's radar, and you're back to square one. You're on the same footing as some guy in Kansas writing his very first script.
Pretty crazy. So so when you're talking about intruders, that was a spec that you wrote to basically create heat again and break back in again.
Right. I I led with my strongest skill set, which was writing a contained thriller.
It's also a very fast-paced page turner of a contained thriller, right? Like you didn't waste a lot of time at all.
Right.
But I think that was really purposeful, right? Like, and actually, you did something on the page that won't be on screen, but that absolutely made me want to keep reading. Like, so I'll tell you, I've been super busy because I've got like my day job, my kids, and then I'm doing this series, which is, this takes a lot of time to put together, and then writing my screenplay, obviously. So right. It's a lot. And so sometimes I can't read a script in one sitting. And so the other day I knew I had a limited amount of time. I said, okay, I'm going to read 40 pages and then I'm putting this down and moving on to the next thing. But within that 40 pages on the page, you wrote note to the reader or something like that. We are only going to see tiny glimpses of the aliens until page 74. And I was just like, well, I want to see what the aliens look like, so I'm just going to keep reading. and that's not going to be on screen. Like on screen, like you're not going to like telegraph that at 74 minutes in, we're going to finally see what they look like.
Right.
I think your audience kind of gets that that's going to be that's an implied payoff. But here you flat out said it, and I was just like, well, I just want to keep reading. so I don't know if that was I don't know if you had any idea that would have that impact or not, but it totally did.
That's exactly what I hoped would happen. There was two things. One, I didn't want the reader to think, oh, it's just going to be the same thing over and over and over again where we don't really see the aliens. And two, I wanted that exact effect where I was promising the reader, if you hang in there, if you just stay with me, we're going to get to some really cool stuff.
It 100% worked. And like, I knew it, like, and I was just like, well, I'll just keep reading. So anyway, and then, once you're that far in, like, you're just going to finish the script. So
right.
So yeah, it was pretty cool.
Exactly. It's like, if you start eating a hamburger, even if you don't like it, when you're halfway through it, you're just going to finish it because you're halfway through it. So if I get you to 74, you're going to finish the script no matter what.
So there's a great example of an unfilmable that probably helped you sell that thing, Most likely people had that same reaction when reading it and just kept turning the pages. And that certainly helps your case. But completely unfilmable.
in Armored, the first meeting I had with Josh Donnan, who was one of the producers that came on board, he said one of the things that hooked him from the very first thing is when I introduced what an armored truck is, I had this line, I don't remember it off the top of my head, it's been a minute since I wrote it, but paraphrasing, it's along the lines of, you see an armored truck, but for you civilians reading this, it's an ACT, which stands for Armored Currency Transportation. So he said, as soon as I read that, even though that's never going to be in the movie, I knew the guy writing this script knew exactly what he was talking about when he was describing the rest of the story. So that made him go all in on the script.
Very cool. Yeah, that's another great example of a way that you can bury something in an action line that's not going to wind up on screen, but that actually absolutely has an impact on the read and on the way the reader experiences it. So It's very cool. So yeah, I know that's a tangent and everything from what we were just talking about, but I think it's a good one. Like, especially, some of the people watching this are newer writers, and there's always that thing when you're new about, what's appropriate to put into a script and how much does format matter and how much do the rules matter. And so I think it's really great to show good examples of rule breaking that have a positive impact.
Right. I'm not a guy who believes there are that the quote unquote unfilmables shouldn't be in a script. because I believe a script is more than a blueprint for a movie. It's
Right.
also a mechanism for conveying a story. And stories are more than just what gets filmed. Stories are about your feelings about how things are filmed. They inform what you're thinking and what you're feeling about it as you're experiencing it. Because, scripts don't have soundtracks. We don't have set designers. We don't have hair and makeup people. We don't have actors who are emoting. We don't have a lens. We can't switch from a 100 millimeter to a 60 millimeter. All we have are the words on the page. So whatever it takes to get the reader engaged in the story absolutely belongs on that page.
Boom, mic drop. So I think that's perfect. So you back to kind of what got you writing Intruders. So you decided to kind of go all in on what you knew you did well, and also I'm assuming you still had a number of contacts who knew that you did that well, right? And
Right.
a number of people who are fans of your work and are aware that you can do that.
Right.
And so, what was your process for, like, how did you approach that?
There are two things that really drew me to Intruders. First, I knew I wanted to write what I'm good at. I wanted to write something that I knew people would identify as being from me. So it contained thriller was, the sort of ballpark that I was operating in. What narrowed it down into Intruders was there were two things. One was the character's journey, which I think once you come up with your big idea, it's just nothing. It's just kind of this nebulous thing of a contained thriller. But until you come up with the character's journey, you don't really have a story.
So true. Yeah.
So once I had that would inform the rest. And the character's journey, for me, is always very personal. And Intruders is probably the most personal story I've ever written.
Really?
It is.
No kidding.
Because in the story, the character is adopted, and he doesn't know why he was put up for adoption, why his parents chose to abandon him. And it's about his discovery of finding out the answers to those questions of why. And he's not just trying to understand why, he's also trying to reconnect with his family. When I started writing this, I am adopted, and I started writing this at the same time I started looking for my birth parents.
Wow, no kidding.
And about the time that it sold, I finally tracked down my biological mother and reconnected with her.
Wow.
So,
did you share with her that you had just written about this at all? Or?
I did. Yeah.
Wow.
It was great. That's serendipity. Powerful. Yeah.
That's mind blowing, man. That's crazy. That's so cool that you got to connect with her too.
Yeah. So I had that character's journey, which really made me think this is what's special. This is what makes it my story, not just any story.
Sure.
And then putting to build on that, I had this idea that there was a reason for the containment, and the reason for the containment in most stories is because something bad's going to happen to you. Look, like in Saw, the reason you're contained in that movie is because something bad is going to happen to you. In Intruders, I flipped that. The reason it's contained is because it's meant to protect you. It's meant to keep you safe. And they don't know that to begin with. They think it's there trapping them. In fact, it's actually there as a shield to protect them from the things they don't know about. Yeah. So once I had the character's journey and I had the flip on the containment part, then I knew I had some elements that were going to make it different and unique and kind of push the envelope about what a contained thriller could be.
So can I ask your process for like how that story developed? I mean, are you much of an outliner, or did you just kind of dive into it? Did you find you had to do multiple drafts before you even sent it to your reps, or?
I'm an outliner for sure, 100%. I definitely outline. I'm not the kind of guy who just takes a kernel of an idea and dives into it. because I detest rewriting. I hate it. So the way to avoid having to write 36 drafts of your script is to do 2 drafts of a 10-page outline so that you can spot all the problems and fix them before you get into 120 pages of a script. So I'm definitely an outliner. As far as reps, I floated the idea past my reps and they said, wow, this is really cool. Go for it. And I went for it. And then I wrote it and I wrote it. And when I had a script that I thought was ready for them, which was probably close to like I want to say draft, technically is probably draft 5, but it would be the first draft.
Yeah.
That's when I showed it to them and they flipped for it and said, we like it a lot. They both had some ideas on how to make it more of what it was trying to be. And so I implemented them and that's it. We took it to Paramount and they had some ideas. And of course, you know, at that point you're being paid. So you write their ideas, not to say their ideas weren't good. They were good. They were great. They were fantastic. But as much as I hate rewriting, you do it because that's the job. And you're a team player and their ideas are good and their ideas took the story I wanted to tell and made it more of the story I was trying to tell. So they were pushing it in the same direction I was trying to push it. That's all. So they brought a fresh perspective on how to push that rock just a little further up the hill.
Cool. So, you know, you said that you hate rewriting, but you still did, you think, about 5 drafts before it went to your reps. So just because like I'm in rewrite mode right now, I'm actually really curious about what that looks like for you. Did you have, you know, in between those drafts, were any of those major changes? Was it a lot of just tinkering? You know, what did that look like?
They're not major changes. Like the story essentially remained the same from beginning to end. It was just tightening a scene to make it tighter, adding a scene where information you think is being conveyed isn't really being conveyed. So you got to drop that information a little more clearly, a little more succinctly. In terms of significant changes, there is one big significant change that happened because my manager suggested it. And when he said it, my jaw literally hung open. I'm like, I can't believe I didn't think of that. Because it seemed like the story, it's you've read it, so you know, but we don't want to give it away. The thing that happens at the very end of the story. Okay. I can't believe I didn't think of having that moment happen, because it seemed like the story was going that whole time. So. Yeah, if you think about the character's journey, I can't believe I didn't have that moment happen at the end until, you know, somebody said, hey.
It just feels like the natural progression of it. So
right, exactly. It felt like it should have been there the whole time, and I can't believe I missed it.
So that doesn't sound like that was a huge amount of work to add in. I mean, you probably did a couple things to set it up, but that I can't even think of right now. But it, you know, aside from writing that scene, it doesn't sound like that was a massive amount of work or a lot of lifting.
No, and I think that's the benefit of outlining before you dive into your script, because you don't need to do a lot of massive work. You don't need to move support structure around and rebuild your house. It's just a matter of decorating.
So where's Intruders at right now?
We were supposed to be in development, or production, but COVID came along and changed the schedules. And
yeah, funny.
So people who were interested in being part of the project, their schedules changed.
Oh no!
And so, you know, we're still looking. We're waiting for COVID to figure everything out.
So you're not trying to repackage anything right now until you kind of understand what the future is going to look like, or?
Yeah, the producers had a director they had their eyes set on. Things changed. People that were circling the project, COVID hit, they sort of had to move along. And so we're like every other project in town. waiting for COVID to be resolved before we
For
can start
sure.
moving forward. But until the studio gets its arms around what production during COVID looks like, nothing's really going forward except for TV, which they can control the production of.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's still plenty of TV happening for sure.
Right.
So has this turned into any additional like heat for you or anything like that?
Uh, yes and no. Yes, ish. And then COVID came along, and shortly after
Again.
yeah, and so that it's killed everything. There's really no opportunity for assignments. You can't do the water bottle tour and go around and meet
Right.
everybody. So hopefully, after it gets produced, we'll get another bite at the apple and try and get some heat off of that and turn that into something.
So what are you working on right now to just kind of keep that momentum going?
I've in the last year, I've written 3 original specs and done 1 draft of Intruders for the studio.
Wow.
So
All right.
I've had 3 original scripts that I've written from scratch in the last year, and the draft for the studio. So I've been keeping busy,
That's a
very
solid
busy.
year, man.
Yeah,
That's
right.
good.
Yeah,
That's really good for sure.
and I think even established writers have to do that. You look at, excuse me, Craig Mazin. He had to
Yeah, right?
re-break in with Chernobyl, right?
Which is
Nobody was
amazing, you know?
nobody was lining up begging Craig Mazin to give them a period story set in Russia about a nuclear disaster. They were all waiting for the next buddy
Yeah,
comedy or
that's the
rom
last thing
com.
you would have expected from him. Absolutely. And
Exactly.
and it blew everybody's mind.
Right. Exactly. So everybody's constantly re-breaking in, redefining themselves, and I think that's a daunting struggle when you're a young writer. You don't realize that you're constantly having to redefine yourself because the landscape underneath you is going to be shifting constantly. So let's say you're writing rom-coms, you break in with rom-coms, you do well with rom-coms for a couple of years. All of a sudden, everything is Marvel. It's like, okay, so now I can't sell my
Right.
rom-coms anymore. So what am I going to do? I'm going to have to redefine myself. You have to take a good look at the market, figure out what the market is doing, and act accordingly. You
Yeah.
know that
So
too. You had a big budget, Die Hard on a bridge type script. That's what the market was after at the time you sold it, right? Obviously. But now you're redefining yourself. I'm guessing you're not writing a big budget Die Hard type
actually
script.
the funny thing is, dude, like I've just been kind of following passion with this one, and I had originally thought I was going to write something pretty low budget, five
Mm-hmm.
to $10 million range,
Right?
and now I find myself writing something that is it's a period piece, and the first draft that I did, I kind of scaled a lot of things back to
Mm-hmm.
offset that,
Mm-hmm.
but this next draft is definitely getting more expensive. And it's coming out well. I really like what's coming out for sure. I'm excited by the story, and I think there's a lot of really, really interesting stuff happening on the page. So I'm just going
Mm-hmm.
to keep exploring it,
Right?
but I don't know how commercial or marketable it's going to be by the time I'm done with it. Like I'm aware that is going to be a challenge, and there's an increasingly narrow number or a more narrow number of buyers available for that as I keep going down that route. But I like what I'm writing, so I'm going to keep on pursuing it and see what happens.
I'm going to
Um,
say there's probably increasingly more buyers for that project.
really,
Yeah, because Netflix and Amazon and HBO and Paramount Plus are all going to be streamers who are hungry for content. And if you saw the thing Netflix just put out where they're launching a new movie every week,
yeah, I know it's insane.
the same, right?
Yeah,
But it just shows
absolutely.
you that appetite for content. There's no way the studios are putting out a new movie every week.
No way.
But the streamers are, and everybody's racing to catch up with Netflix. So you're going to have Apple, you're going to have HBO, you're going to have Paramount Plus once it gets up and going. You're going to have Amazon. You're going to have all these streamers who are hungry for content. And what you're describing is exactly the sort of thing that they'd be interested in.
Maybe. I hope you're right. You know, I don't know what the budget would be. It's hard for me to estimate it. You know, with things that aren't a period piece, I feel like I kind of have my head wrapped around roughly how much that would cost to make. But I don't know, man, maybe like 30 to 40 million at this point by the time it's said and done. So not cheap, you know?
Right.
So, but it's not $100 million movie for sure. So,
right.
I don't know. We'll see.
Right.
You know, ideally at the end of the day, it's something that is able to get me into rooms and get me connected with people again. And, you know, hopefully land me representation and then build from there. You know, it's one script in a sea of them that I'm going to write, and I'm really excited about it, but there's going to be lots more opportunity.
So when you sold your script, the Die Hard on a Bridge script, by the way, what was it called? Not Suspension. It was called
Aftermath.
Sorry, Aftermath. When you sold it, what was your feeling about your window after that, of where people were aware of you and wanting to connect really quickly? You? Yeah,
it dried up really fast. But it was an option, so it wasn't like, you know, a huge spec sale. It was a good option. It didn't get me into the WGA, but it was basically WGA terms most of the way through. Right. It was Adi Shankar was the one that optioned it. I don't know if you know who he is or not, but
I've heard the name.
Significant producer.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, I definitely met a bunch of people off of it, but I didn't get any real work off of it. I got some projects that we started developing with various producers and things like that, but nothing that really materialized, you know?
Right. That's the other thing. No matter how big your window is, I'm going to say 99% of the stuff you talk about with other producers, all the other projects that they're interested in with you, they usually don't add up to anything.
No, there was like one that I did. I must have done, I couldn't tell you how many drafts of a treatment for this guy. Over like 6 to 8 months, you know, just draft after draft of a treatment, you know, and I was just being strung along thinking, yeah, this will turn into something. I mean, you know, they're big producers. Certainly it'll go somewhere and it's worth the effort. And, you know, it didn't go anywhere at all. There was one point where before the holidays, we had a call and he said, you know, can you make this more like Ocean's 11? And I said, okay, that's really different than what we were doing, but sure. I can try and do that. And then the holidays go by. So, you know, it's several weeks. And before we connect again after he's read it. And he said, I think he completely forgot what he had told me. This is too much like Ocean's 11. And like, and that was the last draft I did for him. I didn't tell him why I stopped. I wasn't confident enough to just to call him out on that. But I didn't do another draft. I bowed out of the project after that because it was just maddening, you know?
Right. I went through a similar situation at Fox where they approached me with an idea. It was basically Die Hard on an oil rig. And I wrote close to 3 drafts for them before the project just evaporated into thin air, like it never existed. And that's the reality, is that it probably never did exist. It was something a producer who had a deal at Fox wanted to do, had an idea for it, and they thought, I'll take this and try and push it up the hill, but the studio was never interested in it to begin with.
Yeah.
They totally waste the writer's time thinking, oh yeah, the studio really wants to make this project. Right. If you just give us the right script. So you give them the script and they're like, the studio was never going to make it. They're not interested in it after all.
I mean, because what do they have to lose by having a writer work on it, right? I mean, it's absolutely nothing. So it can be something that they're mildly interested in, and that's enough for them to put somebody through months of work
and torture.
Yeah, super frustrating.
Yeah.
So those are lessons learned, and hopefully
there are a
I'll
lot
be
of
wiser next time around.
When you quote unquote break in, there are a lot of false starts like that you're going to encounter. And before you know it, your 1 year, 2 year window is gone because you've gone down so many dead end roads with projects that didn't really exist.
Absolutely. And I had no idea that this is how it was going to go after I broke in. Like, I got repped and I thought, yes, I'm in, it's done. Just like you were talking about, like you think like you joined the fraternity or whatever.
You placed the fraternity, you're in now. So, yes.
No, not at all.
No. But and you don't know. You think, okay, I'm in. I'm on the lot at Warner Brothers. I'm talking to legitimate vice president about a project. This must be real. It isn't. That project doesn't exist in anyone's mind except for the person you're talking to. And so
you talk about the lot, and like that's so true. Like my first general was at DreamWorks. And, I don't know if you've been there or not, but it's, it's this beautiful like bungalows on the Universal lot. And
on the back of the Universal lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you walk in and like, you're sitting down in the waiting room. There's fucking real Oscar statues there.
Yeah.
And like the spear gun from Jaws is on the wall. And like, this is, this is the thing that I've been chasing for the last 7 years. So I'm just like shaking in my seat, like, but I'm thinking I've made it, and not even close.
You're not even close. And you don't even realize how not close you are.
Right.
Right. You don't realize that the project you're about to discuss is pure bullshit. It's not even a real project that anybody outside that room is aware of.
Yeah.
But you don't know. You have no idea. And before you know it, your time is up and you got to break back in all over again, like you're starting from scratch.
And so you're still doing it 25 years after you started.
Yep.
And I'm back at it after trying to escape. So I don't know. Regardless of all the shitty stuff, for some reason Hollywood gets its hooks in you, and they stay there.
Right. Yeah, because we're all dreamers.
Yeah. Well, you've had the opportunity to see your name on screen, and I'm still chasing that because it just seems like the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah, and it's a very addictive feeling, that feeling of taking your family to a movie theater and seeing your name up on screen, and your parents who think that you're the equivalent of a greeting cards writer working at Hallmark, because they have no idea what writing means, because in their world, writing is like writing a letter or writing a note to pick up milk after work. Right. They have no idea what writing is. So after years of them wanting to believe it's an actual job, finally getting to see it, that sort of validation, man, so good.
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, that actually was yet another reason why I stepped away, because I had an opportunity to make this graphic novel, and at least it was going to be something tangible to be like, see, I am a writer. It exists.
Yeah, it exists.
So, and I'm still really glad that I did that. I'm glad I did, for sure. But, at the end of the day, I definitely want to see my name in the credits, hopefully in a theater. Hopefully that's a thing again. So
right. Even on Netflix, I'd be,
Oh, Netflix would be fine. I'll take Netflix. Absolutely.
Exactly.
So,
right.
I would take Quibi if that even came back. So.
Quibi. Yeah.
Well, anyway, dude, this is great. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And thanks for sending Intruders over. That was a really fun read. So
I appreciate it.
Even though you baited me like that, but it worked. So gotta give you credit.
Damn unfilmables.
It's fun to talk to the guy who wrote the spec that was the inspiration for everything I've ever done.
It's not my fault. You're on your own. I take no blame.
Fair enough. All right. Well, anyway, man, have a great night. Take care.
Yeah.
So I think you'll agree that was pretty awesome. huge thanks to James for the transparency just around his career and the ups and downs of it and how he's kind of figured his way through it. That's really helpful for me, just as I'm kind of trying to set myself up in the right mindset to break back in. And I hope it'll be really helpful to you, whether you're somebody in a position like me where you're trying to re-break in, or maybe you're trying to break in for the first time, and this at least helps you know the types of things to pay attention to and look at, and maybe it helps you avoid a couple pitfalls that others of us have fallen into. So anyway, that was a really, really cool conversation and much, much appreciated. Like normal, I'm giving away a copy of Malice and Mistletoe this week, signed by myself and by Jack Purcell, who's done a ton of great work for DC and Marvel. If you want to win this week's copy, people right now are doing hot takes of or like reactions to having watched Cactus Jack, which is pretty cool. So if you watch Cactus Jack and film some kind of quick reaction, tweet it and tag me in that. I'm at NGD Writes. I will pick one of you and send a copy of Malice and Mistletoe your way. So that's really all I've got for week 19. I've got to dive back into my rewrite. I hope that your writing is going really well. I'm going to be back next week with Adam Barker, and smash cut to black.